2018 18 most interesting upcoming games in alphabetical order. Let's go. A Way Out is being developed by Hazelight, creators of the critically acclaimed Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. If, however, you have never heard of them, then you may have at least seen one of their developers' memorable appearance at the Video Game Awards.
Fuck the Oscars, you know? Fuck the Oscars!
Joseph Fares, a Lebanese movie director turned game developer, claims that despite being published by EA, his vision won't suffer from it. A Way Out will be a co-op action-adventure game telling a story of two convicts who, while quite different from one another, must somehow work together to escape a prison and stay on the run. It probably won't have the deepest gameplay mechanics out there, but judging from the director's previous work, we can at least expect an interesting story. Fun fact, the game will only be playable in co-op. Ancestors, or if you will, Ancestors Legacy, is an upcoming Viking-themed strategy game from a Polish studio Destructive Creations. The studio's debut projects, such as the Ultraviolent Hatred or Ice Defense, which was essentially a jihadist killing simulator, might have made headlines in the past, but they weren't in any means good or even mediocre games. However, Ancestors seems to be different and quickly got us excited. From what we have already played, we can see that it won't be a revolution in the RTS genre, but rather a competent and a fun game with some RPG elements. Apart from that, the game will also try to be historically accurate and depict some events from European history, which can only improve its chances of success. Ancestors probably won't make RTSs great again, but it's shaping up to be a fun game nevertheless.
Have you ever questioned your own sanity?
The works of H.P. Lovecraft aren't that successful when it comes to adaptations. Sure, the Great Cthulhu and other creatures from Lovecraft's twisted mind are recognizable pop culture icons, but rarely do their depictions satisfy the fans of the source material. The upcoming game, set in the Lovecraftian universe, simply titled Call of Cthulhu, might change that. The action-adventure game seems to heavily borrow from the cult classic Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth, which started out as an intriguing action-adventure game, but halfway through became a lackluster FPS. Apart from that, the new Cthulhu game is being developed by Cyanide, the team behind the Stick series, and will focus on exploration, puzzle solving, and is supposed to implement minor RPG elements and some sort of a sanity meter. If you're a Lovecraft fan, you can't miss it, as it looks really promising. Let's just hope that Cyanide won't disappoint. After Dark Souls 3, which was supposed to be the last game in the series, fans of From Software's challenging action RPGs have been left craving for more. Although the studio is working on the enigmatic Shadows Die Twice, we might have to wait a bit longer for the next true Souls-like game. If, however, you don't mind edgy J-pop and anime aesthetics, you might want to check out Code Vein. The Souls-like game from Bandai Namco will take us to a post-apocalyptic world which will explore as a vampire cosplayer. Code Vein won't by any means reinvent the Souls-like gameplay formula, but it will still offer fluid action, lots of customization, co-op, and most importantly, a high difficulty level. If the combat is at least half as fun as in the Dark Souls series, From Software fanatics won't need any convincing to pick this one up upon its February release. THQ Nordic is an interesting publisher to say the least. Instead of milking their most lucrative series or ham-fisting microtransactions into their games, they release them irregularly and subvert the audience's expectations, like it was the case with the recent Spellforce 3 or the Titan Quest expansion. After nearly 5 years, the fans of Darksiders will finally get the long-awaited next chapter of the series. Darksiders 3 will once again blend exploration, slasher-like combat, and some RPG elements, and let us play as yet another horseman of the apocalypse, like the magic-wielding Fury, which will be tasked with battling the 7 deadly sins and restoring the balance to the world. The next game in the series promises some minor tweaks, but the overall gameplay will remain largely the same, and that is precisely what the fans want. If somehow you never heard about the series and became interested, check out various re-releases of the previous games. At first, Days Gone wasn't that promising. It looked like yet another AAA zombie game that desperately wanted to be the next Last of Us. As time passed, however, Sony Band showed us more gameplay and we gradually got excited. Sure, it still feels a lot like Naughty Dog's post-apocalyptic vision of the world, but with enough tweaks and nuances to stand on its own. First of all, we'll be given a motorcycle and an open world to explore. Next to that, the game will include dynamic weather, some crafting, and most importantly, stealth, which might turn out really well considering it's Band, the makers of the PlayStation-era Siphon Filter series. If I'm to be honest though, what sold me on the game was the creation of the zombie horde, which, for the first time in a while, made me scared of the living corpses.
You lied to me, Connor. You lied to me.
A David Cage game is as good as its story and the in-game choices it offers, and that is precisely why 2013's Beyond Two Souls wasn't as well received as Quantic Dream's previous foray into the story-heavy cinematic games. In Detroit Become Human, one of Sony's favorite studios is trying to make up for that. Detroit will be a cyberpunk story about androids and what it really means to be human. Despite appealing to the Ghost in the Shell and Blade Runner fans, the game is also set on giving us various characters that, like in Heavy Rain, can die before the adventure is through, which means our choices will actually have an impact on what happens in the long run. Seeing that the game got some attention lately due to a gameplay segment that showed child abuse, we're confident that this will be a bold and interesting story that will make some of us cry. Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 wasn't exactly a true fighting game, but rather an online brawler focused on grinding. And well, it sucked. Luckily, in 2018 we'll see the legendary manga come back in the form of a 2D fighting game, Dragon Ball FighterZ, or Fighter Z if you know your English. The new anime brawler is being developed by industry veterans at Arc System Works, responsible for such titles as BlazBlue or Guilty Gear, which promises fast-paced action and gameplay depth. We recently got a chance to play an early build with a handful of characters and we were quite impressed. The gameplay is really good and the visuals really push the bar for anime-inspired graphics. Let's just hope that the final product is as good as it is promising and focuses more on fighting rather than fanservice. If it all turns out well, we will end up with a solid fighting game that not only weeaboos will fall in love with. Far Cry 5 is a polarizing game. On one hand, it looks simply like more Far Cry, which in my opinion is good. On the other, it became a bit controversial and got called an anti-Trump, anti-religious white genocide simulator. Even though it might seem like a social justice warrior's wet dream, Ubisoft seems to be steering away from politics in the final product and intends to focus more on gameplay and Watch Dogs 2-like juvenile humor. Is that bad? Quite the opposite. The early version we recently got to play looks really good and promises a vast open world with fun activities and tons of gameplay, and it looks like if you're a Far Cry fan, you won't be disappointed, as the game seems to be a perfect mix of fresh elements and what we came to love about the series so far.
Above us! Wow, amazing!
Follow me.
God of War was one of the biggest surprises of 2016's E3, and it continues to surprise us ever since. The new game from Santa Monica Studio not only wants to reboot the franchise in a way, but it also takes the fan-favorite Greek god with anger management issues to a completely new setting, that of Norse mythology. The gameplay and the setting look a bit similar to this year's Hellblade, and with a AAA budget can be something truly special. From what we can tell, Kratos' son, seen in the trailers, won't die in the first 15 minutes of the game and will be an important part of the core gameplay. Will the duo offer us a good story? Only time will tell. If, however, the narrative side of the game ends up being disappointing, it will certainly be a fun, visually impressive slasher. Kingdom Come Deliverance quickly got its funds on Kickstarter and was shaping up to be one of the most unique RPGs in recent memory. Over time, however, this historical RPG proved to be lacking in some aspects and probably won't be the realistic medieval equivalent of Witcher 3 we all hoped it would be. Nevertheless, the lack of magical monsters and a big emphasis on historical accuracy make it one of the most interesting games of the coming year, especially since the AAA segment seems to be recently ignoring RPG games.
I want to believe there's a world out there, Artyom. I want to dream.
At first, Metro 2033 seemed like yet another budget title that wanted to cash in on the popularity of the cult classic Stalker game. Upon the release, however, it turned out to be a fun and interesting fresh FPS, which paved the way for a much more improved sequel, Metro Last Light. It goes without question that the depressing atmosphere of the underground tunnels is the series' biggest quality, and that is why some fans were scared for the upcoming Metro Exodus. Don't worry though, the author of the original book is working closely with the developers, and while the new Metro will be more open world, it will still be as depressing and dark as we want it to be.
I used to dream that when my God came back, he would forgive us. That's the trouble with dreams.
Pillars of Eternity is probably the best example of the recent wave of old-school inspired role-playing titles. The upcoming sequel will reset our level and let us continue to play as our protagonist. Obsidian also promises more of the same and to acknowledge our decisions from the previous pillars. The new Mediterranean-inspired setting got some of our classic RPG experts skeptical in terms of the atmosphere, but that's a minor worry compared to what shapes up to be a great sequel to a great game.
Maybe when your mother's finished mourning your father, I'll keep her in black, on your behalf.
Going back to the Red Dead franchise after the phenomenal success of GTA Online seems like a bold move on Rockstar's part, and that is precisely why the upcoming Red Dead Redemption 2 is our most anticipated game of the year. Like in the first Redemption, in the prequel, which this game is supposed to be, we expect to once again experience a great story that plays around with Western tropes and gets rid of genre cliches. It goes without saying that the game is a strong Game of the Year contender as of now, and it's nearly impossible it will disappoint fans of the open-world action games. We still don't know much about the story and the locations the game will be set in, but what has us concerned is the online element, which will have to try really hard to meet our expectations after Rockstar's previous multiplayer element. Ever since the game based on the movie Spider-Man 2, video games with Peter Parker have been either meh or just okay, and that is quite a shame to be honest. Not only is Spider-Man one of the most popular characters in Marvel, but he also had some of the best stories ever seen in superhero comic books. Up until now, it seemed that only Batman can get a great AAA game, but the upcoming Spider-Man from Insomniac Games seems like it will finally be a game that will realize the web-slinger's potential. The upcoming sandbox will not only focus on more cinematic sequences and quick-time events, but will also give us greatly enjoyable exploration. As of now, we don't know much about the story, but it looks like a big part of it will revolve around the Negative Man, one of Marvel's lesser-known villains, which is quite an interesting move.
3月10日、僕たちは帝国領内を進撃していた。あの戦争こそが僕たちの青春だった。
Valkyria Chronicles was one of the most interesting new IPs of the previous generation, a mix of turn-based RPG combat, permadeath, World War II Europe-like setting, and anime girls that sadly not many people got to play. After a disappointing sequel, a great third game that was never released in the West, and a recent spin-off that no one has really asked for, it seemed as if the series was going to die a sudden death. Luckily, Sega wants to bring the franchise back to its roots in Valkyria Chronicles 4 that got announced quite recently. The events of the new Valkyria take place during the first game of the series, but will be set in a different region and follow a brand new cast. Unlike Valkyria Chronicles 2 and 3, which were at times a bit lighthearted and focused on a teen cast, the newest entry in the series is intended to be a bit darker and more grounded in reality, just like the first game of the series was. Life is Strange was a great game that no one believed in at first, which soon, after its first episode came out, dethroned the beloved Telltale studio. The developers of Tumblr User Simulator are coming back in 2018 with a Victorian-era dark vampire action RPG that seems to be heavily inspired by the cult classic Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. Vampire, while not having the best graphics and fighting system, is quite impressive in its scope. Every character in the game world is said to have their own personality and some connection to a potential quest. Since our protagonist is a vampire, we will eventually need to feed on one of them, thus blocking access to story content, while not feeding at all will be impossible. An interesting idea to be sure, but we can't ignore the possibility that the game might share the fate of the studio's debut, Remember Me, which sadly never truly tapped into its potential. The second season of Telltale's critically acclaimed The Wolf Among Us is probably the most enigmatic game on this list. We know that it's coming out and, well, that's it. The 80s and noir-inspired detective story is to this day one of Telltale's best episodic games, and is quite likely that the studio will once again be able to recapture the magic of the Fables comic books. What has us worried is the gameplay and the story themselves. The latest series from the studio are far from what we would expect from the developers of the phenomenal Walking Dead. It seems as if recently Telltale got too big, too quick, and even they are losing track of how many episodic games they are currently working on. Let's just hope that the new Wolf Among Us will be a glorious comeback for the developer. Let us know if we missed something interesting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.